buonasera e buonanotte a tutti voi. Io sono Pamela e vi do il benvenuto nella casa dell'O-Fi. Allora, siccome devo ovviamente riprendere a studiare perché la sessione invernale è finita, ma si sta avvicinando quella estiva e c'è un bel po' di materiale da leggere e da studiare, direi di farlo insieme, quindi ne approfitto e leggo insieme a voi. Oggi andiamo a leggere Mrs. Dalloway di Virgina Woolf in lingua originale. Iniziamo subito. Mrs. Dalloway said she would buy the flowers herself, but Lucy had her work cut out for her. The doors would be taken off the hinges, from Pomeroy's men were coming, and then, though Glennie said Dalloway, what a morning, fresh as if issued children on a pitch. What a lark, what a plunge, so it had always seemed to her when, with a little squeak of the hinges, which she could hear now, she had burst open French windows and plunged a burden into the open air. How fresh, how calm, still at the days of course, the air was in the early morning, like the flap of a wave, the kiss of a wave, chill and sharp, and yet, for a girl of 18 as she then was, solemn, feeling, as she did, standing there at the open window, that something awful was about to happen, looking at the flowers, at the trees with the smoke winding off them, and the birds rising, falling, standing and looking, until Peter Walsh said, musing among the vegetables, was that it? I prefer men to cauliflowers. Was that it? You must have said it at breakfast one morning when she had gone out onto the terrace. Peter Walsh. He would be back from India one of these days, June or July, she forgot which, for his letters were awfully dull. It was his saying, well, remember. His eyes, his pocket knife, his smile, his grumpiness, and when millions of things had utterly vanished, how strange it was. A few sayings like this about cabbages. She stiffened a little on the curb, waiting for Turntall's van to pass. A charming woman, Scrubber bestowed her, knowing her as one does know people who live next door to one in Westminster, had such a bird about her, of the jay, blue-green, light, vivacious, though she was over 50 and grown very white since her illness. There she perched, never seen, waiting to cross, very upright, for having lived in Westminster, how many years now? Over 20. One feels even in the midst of the traffic, waking at night, Clarissa was positive, a particular hush, solemnity, an indescribable pause, a suspense, but that might be a heart, affected, they said, by influenza, before Big Ben strikes. There, out it boomed, first a warning, musical, then the hour, irrevocable. The lead in the circles dissolved in the air. Such fools we are, she thought, crossing Victoria Street. For heaven only knows why one loves it so, how one sees it so, making it up, building it round one, tumbling it, creating it every moment afresh. With the various firms, the most dejected of miseries sitting on doorsteps, drink their downfall to the same, can be dealt with. She felt positive by acts of parliament for the very reason they love life. In people's eyes, in the swing, tramp and trudge, in the bellow and the uproar, the carriages, motor cars, omnibuses, vans, and sandwich men shuffling and swinging, brass bands, barrel organs, and the triumph and the jingle, and the strange high singing of some aeroplane overhead was what she loved. Life, London, this moment of June. For it was the middle of June. The world was over, except for someone like Mrs. Boxcroft at the embassy last night eating her heart out because that nice boy was killed, and now the old manor house must go to a cousin. Old Lady Bexborough opened the bazaar, they said, with a telegram in her hand. John, her favourite, killed. But it was over, thank heaven, over. It was June. The king and queen were at the palace, and everywhere, though it was still so early, there was a beating, a stirring, a galloping ponies, tapping of cricket bats, birds, ascot, run aloud, and all the rest of it, wrapped in the soft mesh of the grey blue morning air, which, as the day wore on, would unwind them, and set down on their lawns and pitches the bouncing ponies, whose poor feet just struck the ground, and up they sprung, the whirling young men and laughing girls in the transparent muslins who, even now, after dancing all night, were taking their absurd woolly dogs for a run, and even now, at this hour, these great old dog wedgers were shooting out in their motor cars on errands of mystery, and the shopkeepers were fidgeting in their windows with their past in diamonds, the lovely old sea-green brooches in 18th century settings to tempt Americans, but one must economize, not buy things rashly for Elizabeth, and she, too, loving it as she did with an absurd and faithful passion, being part of it, since her people were conjurers, courtiers, once in the time of the Georges. She too was going that very night to kindle any lemonade to give our party, but how strange, entering the park, the silence, the mist, the hum, the slow swimming heavy ducks, the pouched birds waddling, and who should be coming along with his back against the government buildings, most appropriately carrying a dispatch box stamped with the royal arms, who but Hugh Whitbread, our old friend Hugh, the admirable Hugh. Good morning to you, Clarissa, said Hugh, rather extravagantly, for they had known each other as children. Where are you off to? I love walking in London, said Mrs. Dalloway. Really, it's better than walking in the country. They had just come up, unfortunately, to see doctors. Other people came to see pictures, go to the opera, take the daughters out. The Whitbreads came to see doctors. Times without number, Clarissa had visited Evelyn Whitbread in a nursing home. Was Evelyn ill again? Evelyn was a good deal out of sorts, said Hugh, intimating by a kind of pout or swell of his very well-covered, manly, extremely handsome, perfectly upholstered body. He was almost too well-dressed always, but presumably had to be, with his little job at court. That his wife had some internal ailment, nothing serious, which, as an old friend, Clarissa Dalloway would quite understand without requiring him to specify. Ah yes, she did, of course. What a nuisance, and felt very sisterly and oddly conscious, at the same time, of her hat. Not the right hat for the early morning, was that it? But you always made her feel as he buzzed along, raising his hat rather extravagantly and assuring her that she might be a girl of 18, and of course he was coming to her party tonight. Evelyn absolutely insisted, only a little late he might be after the party at the palace, to which he had to take one of Jim's boys. She always felt a little skimpy beside you, schoolgirlish, but attached to him partly from having known him always, but she did twinkle, a good sort in his own way, though Richard was nearly driven mad by him, and as for Peter Walsh, he had never till this day forgiven her for liking him. She could remember scene after scene at Burton, Peter furious, Hugh not, of course, his match in any way, but still not a positive imbecile as Peter made out, not a mere verbose block no brain, nothing but the manners and breeding of an English gentleman that was only haughty and bitter at his worst, and it could be intolerable, it could be impossible, but adorable to walk with on a morning like this. June had drawn out every leaf on the trees. The mothers of people give suck to their young. Messages were passing the fleet to the Admiralty. Arlington Street and Piccadilly seemed to show off the very air in the park and lift its leaves hotly, brilliantly, on waves of the divine vitality which Clarissa loved. To dance, to ride, she had adored all that. But they might be parted for hundreds of years. She and Peter, she never wrote a letter, and his were drastics, but suddenly it would come over her. If he were with me now, what would he say? Some days, some sights bringing him back to her calmly, without the old bitterness, which perhaps was the reward of having cared for people. They came back in the middle of St. James Park on a fine morning. Indeed they did, but Peter, however beautiful the day might be, and the trees and the grass and the little girl in pink, Peter never saw a thing of all that. He would put on his spectacles if she told him to. He would look. It was the state of the world that interested him. Wagner, Poe's poetry, people's characters eternally, and the defects of her own soul. How they scolded her, how they argued. She would marry a prime minister and stand at the top of a staircase. The perfect hostess, he called her. She cried over it in her bedroom. She had the makings of the perfect hostess, he said. So she was still finding herself arguing in St. James Park, still making out that she had been right, and she had too not to marry him. For marriage, a little license, a little independence there must be between people living together, day in, day out, in the same house, which a rich gave her, and she him. Where was he this morning, for instance? Some committee, she never asked what. But with Peter everything had to be shared, everything gone into, and it was intolerable. And when he came back to the scene in the little garden by the fountain, she had to break with him, or they would have been destroyed, both of them ruined. She was convinced, though she had worn about her for years like an arrow sticking in her heart, the grief, the anguish, and then the horror of the moment when someone told her at a concert that he had married a woman met on boat going to India. Never should she forget that. Cold, heartless, prude, he called her. Never could she understand how he cared. But those Indian women did presumably silly, pretty, fencing groups, and she was still pity, for he quite happy, he assured her, perfectly happy, though he had never done a thing that they talked of. His whole life had been a failure. It made her angry still. Bene, per oggi va bene così. Io spero veramente tantissimo che anche questo video sia stato di vostro gradimento e soprattutto che vi abbia rilassato, perché quello è l'importante. A me interessa che voi stiate bene. Vi ringrazio ancora una volta per tutto il supporto, tutto il sostegno che state dando al canale. Veramente sono contentissima, felicissima di tutto quanto. Mi dà veramente tanta gioia, mi sprona a fare sempre di più. E niente, vi mando un grosso bacio e ci vediamo come sempre al prossimo video.